Hi, I'm Frank Piller. I'm Professor of Technology and Innovation Management at RWTH Aachen University. And my research is about how companies make sense and benefit from new process technologies like Industry 4.0, additive manufacturing, or artificial intelligence in manufacturing.
Hi, Frank. Good to see you.
Hi, Donna. Pleasure to be with you, at least remotely.
Yes, thank you so much for taking the time. And we would, of course, have loved to host you in Stockholm. We'll do that next time.
No, absolutely. Stockholm is always very worthwhile a trip.
Well, thank you. And by your definition, Frank, what is Industry 4.0? What does it consist of and what doesn't it consist of?
Well, there are many definitions of Industry 4.0, and now while we do our interview, there is the Hannover Fair running and they are celebrating the 10th anniversary of this term. And actually in the last decade, there were different understandings. Some see it about, cyber physical systems, meaning that equipment, industrial assets get sensors, produce data to generate insights. Others focus more on this industrial Internet of Things, the connectivity. But for me, the essence of Industry 4.0 is collaboration. It's a really unheard of ability to connect things and with to collaborate between humans and machines, and between machines among themselves. What Industry 4.0 is not, you also asked, it's not digitalization, as digitalization is actually, for me, Industry 3.0. Think about this is what we had since the 1970s, that we had computerization. But Industry 4.0 is really about connecting these digital devices.
And why is this era so important? What are some of the cost, efficiency, and environmental benefits for organizations to be aware of?
For many years, we thought about operational excellence, operational equipment efficiency, to reduce unplanned downtime, to have better quality, to have energy savings. And I think this is an important but a little bit boring driver. As a good company, you're doing this anyway. Where for me, Industry 4.0 really gets exciting is if you use it for new business model innovation. If you really see that you have new abilities in your smart factory, in your connected supply chain to provide more value towards your customers or society per se. And one special point you mentioned indeed is sustainability. And for me, it was quite obvious for many years, that if you have a more efficient production, you also have a more sustainable one as you just produce less waste. But recently, we saw that Industry 4.0 also really can shift sustainability to an entire new level. At least in Germany, a good factory, and I think as Germans, we know how to do good factories. A good factory has about 40% utilization of its assets at all. The best German factory has 65%. So there's a huge waste of unutilized resources. And by connecting those, perhaps with demand from others, we can really bring utilization to a higher demand. And so it's not just about getting a few percentages out of efficiency, but really doubling, even tripling, the resources we have, so that in the end, with limited resources, we can produce what we still need to fulfill demand.
If this is such a positive trend, why are some organizations still not embracing it?
If I would know that, then I would be a billionaire. But why are companies not just doing it? In general, it's nothing where you just turn on a switch. As what I learned is really that Industry 4.0, of course, demands a strong technological, IT backbone. But in the end, it's really a mindset, so to say. So it's, of course, first you need to connect your devices. You have to store the data. But then you have to turn this into insights, into predictions or prescriptions. And even if you have prescriptions, you have to execute on those. And along this, we need a lot of changes in the chains, how we access information, who is allowed to utilize information. Or do we trust, as a really experienced managers, the insights of an algorithm? So there may be a new kind of not invented here, or algorithm aversion. But perhaps the biggest challenge, and it shows consistently into many surveys and audits, is that you also need a clear vision. Why are you doing it? And I think this is where many companies still lack. And this is why I'm happy that you in your company are really taking this exercise with all your executives to think about and strategize about it. Is a missing alignment among top executives is consistently shown as a number one hurdle. So are we doing it to really just have more efficient plants? Are we doing it for a new business model? Are we really doing it for a better world? And what sounds rather simple is not in reality. So to define the purpose of your Industry 4.0 initiative probably is where you really should start with.
So there needs to be a vision, there needs to be alignment, and there also needs to be a lot of change management is what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely. And in addition, of course, the upskilling or reskilling, and all that. But this is what normally companies manage. But it's really, I think, with this alignment, really the strategizing why you are doing it. This is where I would say Industry 4.0 starts.
Can you give us some examples of early adapters of digitalization and disruptive technologies, and what can we learn from these?
So in the industrial sector where you are interested in, really the leading companies, interestingly, are component manufacturers. It are not really OEMs that do entire equipment, but component manufacturers that often actually produce components that you can use to build a smart factory. So they use somehow their factory as a showcase. And they have remarkable results. In Germany, we have a company called Festo for hydraulic devices, another SEW. They do autonomous transportation devices you have for intra-factory logistics. And they really have not just showcase factories, but really transformed their factories since a couple of years in a very holistic way. But as I said, their motivation is not just to improve their own efficiency, but also to showcase their products. Beyond this, it is slowly coming. So we see now, for example, a new generation of automotive plants being released. The German auto industry, often seen, as a very leading edge industry, actually wasn't for many years. But last year, at the end of last year, Daimler, or now Mercedes-Benz, after the split, opened the Factory 56, the latest factory, which becomes like a pilot for all the future factory layouts. They do their e-vehicles there. And this really follows a very, very different, philosophy setup, both with regard to the physical layout, the flexibility, but also the IT platform infrastructure behind. So I would say to really see the really cool examples, we'll probably still have to wait a couple of years as companies are just learned, in the last decade of what works in small pilots, and now are putting these pilots together, in really a consistent new industrial setup.
What are some of the most common mistakes and misconceptions of companies that explore digitalization?
Well, perhaps one mistake is that digitalization and Industry 4.0 starts in your IT department. That is really a task of IT. I think it should, in the end, start with, on the one hand side, as we talked about earlier, with the top management, for vision and purpose. But actually, it also should start with the user. And in the end, the user, the operator in the plant, the logistics worker, in your warehouse. These are the people that have their daily challenges, their daily problems, to solve. And you have to start with them and asking, okay, how can we help you to become more satisfied in your job, become more efficient, to have a lesser workload, physical workload, and so on. And then starting really bottom up from these use cases in a holistic way, I think, is really where you should start.
When and how does a company become a trendsetter rather than a follower when it comes to embracing the digital era and disruptive technologies?
It's actually a very good question, and I would ask back, do I really have to be a trendsetter? Perhaps I'm really good as a follower, and again, it depends on what's your purpose of Industry 4.0. If you're mainly on operational efficiency, as you say, the products, we build are really the same as before, well, actually being a follower is good. Let the others make the mistakes, Wait until standards settle, and really see the cost savings kicking in. However, when you use it to really not just change your manufacturing, but also to produce different products, as your products itself, themselves become smart, then probably being a follower has some advantages. And especially if we think about what's happening in the moment is on these economics of data. We all know economics of learning and economies of scale. These are the old drivers, that make companies wealthy. And we wanted to be a market leader as we had economies of scale. However, what we now have in an age where we also have artificial intelligence, machine learning to make sense of this data, you really see that you are getting new kind of learning economics if you accumulated most data, perhaps from your own integrated silos of data within your organization, but perhaps also by getting access to other piles of data. A very interesting example, a very recent one, is from the Volkswagen Group, Volkswagen, Porsche, Audi, and so on. So they were rather late, I would say, in implementation of digital factories compared to some others. They were also late with regard to connected cars, if you think to Tesla, but chief executives, they did a big jump forward. So they teamed up with a cloud provider to build a manufacturing cloud for their organization, using Porsche, as somehow the pilot organization within the group, as this is a demanding high-end car. Probably you don't have so many cost constraints, compared to a mass volume car. And they use this for this piloting, creating use cases. But now, when they're about to roll it out among the group, they are also at the same time opening it to totally independent third parties. So they would invite your company to join the Volkswagen manufacturing platform. Why? Well, as they understood, if you, as a totally different company from a totally different industry, would join their platform, perhaps they would get access to some data from your manufacturing where they also could learn from their own. They probably can utilize the infrastructure they built in a better extent. And they hope that also you would find it more favorable, by joining their platform instead of building your own or building a third one. So what they're happening is a clear leadership strategy, as they understood that leadership in this thing will be about really getting access to a lot of different sources of data where you then use machine learning for accumulated learning.
What role can academia and other external actors play for an organization such as Atlas Copco when it comes to responding to the disruptive trends?
Yeah, so thanks that you're asking for academia. Well, I would say our role is, in the end, on the one hand side, of course, we do technology development. Here in Aachen, we have a huge cluster of excellence, 80 million euros funding for our research project. We really think on the next generation, of Industry 4.0, new data compression standards, AI algorithms. But I think also what we do as management professors is actually to help companies like you in sense making, in really putting perhaps the pieces together, having a neutral perspective on it. And the same is true to all these external startups. I don't know about it, but I would bet you also have some initiatives to team up with startups to really get access to, for example, new AI algorithms, to get access to new kind of robotic devices. And these startups can experiment and innovate much cheaper than you can do. And they also provide you skills you normally don't have as an established companies, very, very specific skill set. So actually, and think about what I said at the beginning about the definition of Industry 4.0, that it is about collaboration. So also in the way how you execute is by collaborating with these external parties to build your skills, but perhaps also to later on to execute, as if we really have this good connectivity, we don't have to build all capabilities internally, So we can also become a more leaner organization, more focused on our core assets, products, capabilities, by using this collaboration productivity that Industry 4.0 provides to us, by utilizing this network of partners. And this is why I also would say an open mindset, open-mindedness is probably also one of the core success factors in the smart factory journey.
One could say that digitalization and disruptive technologies are really challenging the core of organizational structures and cultures. But how can they support industry rather than being seen as a threat? What are your thoughts there?
It's an interesting question. Should we support it or see it as a threat? Sadly, if I'm a little bit, allow me to philosophize at this point, sadly we know that as established organizations we only can change in a crisis. Think about the pandemic. We suddenly got a lot of stuff done, with about digital work from home that we all know about before, but we don't have the urgency to implement it. And I think this is the same also with an Industry 4.0 implementation. Somehow, as managers, as human beings, we need this external pressure, this threat perception, to change. However, I totally are with you that officially we should do it out of a moment of strength, when we really are very well positioned, when we have this slack, then we should embrace our change. And I think this is then when it works easier to also really connect it with the vision and purpose, to really see that we do it to deliver on new value propositions for our customers, and if we really buy into a new value proposition, perhaps by co-creating this with our customers, I think then it's also easier to bring this initiative forward, instead if we say, well, we put all our internal plans in competition and who saves 3% of cost first is a winner.
So where are we now at this Industry 4.0 journey? Is it still an early phase or are we entering more of a mature phase in your opinion?
So I think we are somehow at a shift. We now have a decade of Industry 4.0, and I think conceptually, from a management perspective, we understood it quite well. We have these early adopters and so on. So I would say for the traditional perspective of Industry 4.0, to connect your assets, to gather data, to integrate data, silos of data, to get prescriptions and predictions out of this, we are actually in a good stage. And, well, I can say it easily, you just have to execute. However, we are also in the moment at a shift to what some people call Industry 5.0, others say it's this. And this is that we move our platform from what we do within our company to industrial ecosystems. You may have heard of Gaia X, a very big European initiative to create a new industrial data governance. And the idea of the German and the French governments is to create the next Airbus, a company like where Airbus as a European initiative really in the end was beating Boeing, and the other big guys. There is this idea we can do this with Gaia X to build a big European player. And there it's not just about integrating data, but it's about really sharing value in an entire ecosystem. A little bit the idea of a platform around Volkswagen that I mentioned earlier. So, and this shift is just beginning. And it's really more theorized. Technically it's possible. We have some early examples, but think about what we saw in the last decade in the consumer good industries. There we have these big platform players like Facebook, Google, Amazon that clearly changed the way, how we consume, how the world economics tick in the consumer good markets. This shift has not yet happened in the industrial market. And this is about to happen now. I don't foresee that we will have a few dominant, winner-take-all players as we see in the consumer market, but we'll see more heterogeneous landscapes of these ecosystems. So if you really would like to be a follower, I would say really making sense about what this means, for Atlas Copco, these ways of an economy based on connected business ecosystems, where the integrator are pools, of industrial data. This clearly could provide you in a leadership position.
Very good. Thank you so much for taking the time, Frank.